Doug Hamp, Rob Skiba coming to you with episode 21 of the Quest for Truth. We're glad that we could get back, and we are excited to get back into this. Rob, it's been a long time since we've done our last one.
Yeah, it's been a while, but we're ready to go again. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these are fun. So yeah, Revelation chapter 6. Let's just jump in. We won't keep talking. We'll just get into it. So Revelation chapter 6, verse 1. Now when I saw the Lamb opened one of the seals, I heard one of the four living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. We'll actually stop right there. Now, who is this on the white horse, Rob?
Well, standard eschatology would say that that's the Antichrist, and I used to believe and preach that myself for quite some time. I no longer believe that. So I'll pass it over to you just to see where you're at on it, and maybe we can talk about it some more.
Okay. Well, okay, so we have the Lamb opening the seals, and here comes the first of these judgments. It is a tricky question. I'm still persuaded that this could be the Antichrist. I don't think that it has to be the Antichrist. But this one, he's on a white horse. He has a bow. A crown is given to him. And he went out conquering and to conquer. And if we look at the following horses, they are all judgment. They don't seem to be very good guys. But I'm curious, what is your position now, Rob?
Well, let's start off by saying what the purpose of the horses are.
Okay, fair enough.
I believe that the horses are harbingers. I actually believe that the four horsemen are in the birth pang phase. Now, standard eschatology would say that the first horse is the Antichrist, and it's the beginning of the 7-year tribulation period, 7-year peace treaty, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not on that page anymore. I don't believe the Antichrist actually shows up until the 5th trumpet. So I really put these in the birth pang phase. I believe that at least the first 4, maybe even the first 5 seals can actually happen prior to the kicking off of the 7-year tribulation period.
Yeah.
So if I think of them as, they can be backed off, any number of years. It depends on when you think the birth pangs began. Personally, I think the birth pangs can go all the way back to earlier in the 20th century, probably even the beginning of the 20th century, if not backing off into the 1800s, into the Industrial Revolution.
Yes. Yeah, I think that I think there's a lot of merit to that. We should point out, of course, that in the book of Zechariah, we also have 4 red horses. And as far as we can tell, these are angels that are riding these horses. We need to point out also that there are horses on the other side of the veil. That horses are a typical means of transportation for angels. Now, why they would need a horse when it seems like they can just get around by themselves, we have no idea. Scripture does not tell us why they need horses. Maybe because horses are cool. I don't know. Think about it in 2 Kings chapter 6 when Elisha prays that his young man would see beyond, and it says the Lord opens his eyes and he sees that the hills are covered with horses and chariots of fire. Right? So there are horses on the other side of the veil, and we know that Jesus is going to come back on a horse. He doesn't need a horse, clearly. I mean, he's, the creator. He can get around any old way he wants to. So Jesus is not, in need of a horse. But I don't know, maybe it looks cool. Maybe it's like, hey, horses are fun to ride. Why not ride a horse? We don't know.
Yeah.
But there's something about it.
You mentioned Zechariah, so let's go ahead and go there. That's Zechariah chapter 1.
Yeah, verse 8.
Verse 8, I saw by night, and behold, a man riding on a red horse. So there's one of the same color horses.
Right.
The hollow. And behind him were horses, red, sorrel, I'm not sure what sorrel is, and white. Then I said, My Lord, what are these? So the angel who talked with me said to me, I will show you what they are. And the man who stood among the myrtle trees answered and said, These are the ones whom the Lord has sent to walk to and fro throughout the earth. So they answered the angel trees and said, We have walked to and fro throughout the earth, and behold, all the earth is resting quietly. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it really is. There's also in Job, it says there's a day when all the sons of God came to assemble themselves before the Lord, and Satan also was among them. We also see in the book of 2 Kings, when God wants to deceive King Ahab, he calls a council, and all these different angels show up, apparently good and bad, and eventually a bad angel stands up and says, hey, I'll go and deceive Ahab. I'll be a lying spirit in his mouth and in the mouths of the prophets, and that's exactly what happens. So understanding that there are these angelic beings, good and bad, that are going out and they're doing their thing. And I think it's quite interesting that as we go on through the book of Revelation, we're going to see that there's even an angel of the rivers. We see that in Revelation chapter 16. So there's an angel of the rivers and the seas, and they have, of course, tremendous power. So obviously we don't have a lot of details about what angels are able to do, but we have sufficient details to paint a decent picture of what's happening there. So it could be that Revelation chapter 6 is not talking about the Antichrist as you suggested, but it's talking about some angelic being, whether good or bad.
Well, and that's my question. Does it have to be angelic? Look, man riding on a red horse. Now I know that angels very often do appear as men. Just curious as to why it didn't say that an angel riding on a red horse. It says a man riding on the red horse.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. We have the same thing, though, in Zechariah chapter 1, where they're not specifically called
That's what I'm talking about, Zechariah 1. I'm talking about
right.
Zechariah 1:8.
Okay, right. So, yeah, a man riding on a red horse. And he says, so the angel who talked with me said, I will show you what they are. And these are the ones whom the Lord has sent to walk to and fro throughout the earth. You're right. We don't know. It's interesting, though, that when Satan comes and he said that he's been walking to and fro throughout the entire earth, maybe we should just cruise over there to Job chapter 1. In Job chapter 1, when Satan appears, it says in verse 6, verse 6, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come? So Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it. So we see a similar kind of action that Satan is going out, and what he's doing we're not specifically told, but that same language is being used there, that he's just kind of coming and going. He's going to and fro and walking back and forth on the earth. That is the same thing essentially that we see, that we've walked to and fro throughout the earth. And apparently there's nothing happening here in Zechariah chapter 1.
What's a sorrel?
That's a great question. And speckled is what some translations have. So, kind of a dotted, you might think of like white with red spots or something like that.
Yeah, because it's interesting. We have a red horse, apparently a spotted horse of some sort, and a white horse, a black horse, and I wonder if sorrel might be similar to the gray horse or the pale green or whatever horse the death rides.
Yeah, I don't know. Fair question. In a way, what we're trying to do here in Revelation is, of course, discern who these are, and it may be that we just won't be able to get to the bottom of this. I mean, there's been, of course, a lot of ideas about what these could be. That these represent different kingdoms. They represent different philosophies of men. Some people have suggested that the white horse represents the Pope. That you have the second one, the fiery red. Maybe that represents communism. The third could potentially represent black with a pair of scales. That could represent Western capitalism. And then the green horse in Revelation 6 could possibly represent Islam. And I think each of these different ideas has its pros and its cons. Very interesting, and in fact, I'm not at all opposed to such an interpretation. The only question I have is, how do we prove which one is true? And that's what I find challenging.
Yeah. Well, I've heard all those theories, and at various times in my life I've subscribed to a few of them myself. As I started looking at these horses a few years ago, though, I looked at death as an individual. That death is a definite riding on this horse. So I thought, well, if death is a definite individual riding on this horse, what if the other three also are definite individuals riding on the horse as well? Now, of course, many would say the first one being the definite individual as the Antichrist. I don't buy that one anymore, because, like I said, I don't think the Antichrist shows up until the fifth trumpet. So I'm going, even as far as the Industrial Revolution, I began to think of individuals that might fit the bill, so to speak. And if you look at this particular horse, it says that it had a bow and a crown was given to him. So this person has some sort of authority, and he went out to conquering and to conquer. Now, I noticed that it says bow, but it doesn't say bow and arrows. And show him with raised with a bow, but no arrows. And I'm just going to speculate here. This is pure speculation, not thus saith the Lord or anything. This is thus thinketh Rob. But I'm going to put up a screenshot here and see if we can talk through this a little bit. I was thinking about, okay, what individual or organization has gone forward to conquer but doesn't fire a shot? And I began to think about the central banking system, because the House of Rothschilds and the central banking system has financed both sides of every war for over 100 years. They go forward and conquer, but they never actually fire a shot. And when I started to look into the family crests of the Rothschilds, for instance, I found a bunch of arrows bound up in a bow. So they've, assuming they have a bow somewhere, they're not using the arrows. The arrows are all bound up. And, you can see a whole bunch of the different logos. If you just, do a Google search on Rothschild family crest arrows, that's what you're going to find. Then I started thinking about some of the other things that they were involved in, like the CFR, and did a search on there, and there's a dude on a white horse, kind of doing the Heil Hitler sign. And the sign underneath here in Latin says everywhere. So I began to think, well, that kind of fits. I don't know. They conquer without firing a shot. The House of Rothschild is really kind of the top of the pyramid scheme, so to speak, with the central banking system and whatnot. Has a family crest with arrows all bound up, and a dude on a horse for the Council for Foreign Relations, and it says everywhere underneath. I thought, well, if I was to speculate, that certainly seems to fit the bill. Right down. I was to put a lot of people want to assign U.S. presidents to a lot of these things because we are the global empire, so to speak. Then it would be Clinton, who was very tied in with the Council on Foreign Relations and advanced a whole lot of things through them. So again, I'm just speculating on that, but that seems to fit the bill on the white horse.
I think we need to understand that, this probably isn't talking about one specific individual, human anyway, but it's talking about a principality. Back in Daniel chapter 10, we see that this angel that is going to bring a message to Daniel is withstood by the prince of Persia and the kings of Persia for 21 days. And then later he says that he has to go fight with the prince of Greece. So there are individual, unique angels, bad angels in this case, that are over different areas. They're principalities and their powers, and they have a regional kind of authority base. So, I think rather than saying that, oh yeah, the guy in the white horse is most definitely the Antichrist, I don't think we can prove that. In fact, if we look at the other ones, like you're saying, how death is a specific individual, and we see that he is going to be thrown into the lake of fire at the end, that that would make sense as well for these others, and that they're the same kind of being. Now, again, I'm not absolutely certain that it cannot be the Antichrist, but I think the idea that it could be the Vatican has quite a bit of merit, because the Vatican for the last, I don't know, 1600 years roughly, has been doing quite a bit of stuff, right? They certainly have power. They have a crown. They have the power of war, right? They have the power to put down entire kingdoms if they so choose. And could there be a demon who is actually behind that? And again, I'm not throwing Catholics under the bus. I'm simply talking about the Vatican papal system itself, because that has all kinds of trouble. Whether a Catholic believes in Jesus is another question, but the Vatican papal system is just fraught with difficulty. And you brought up a very interesting point talking about the House of Rothschild. We need to remember, it's something that we forget as Christians, as Gentile Christians, very quickly, that again, it's all about the Jews, right? I mean, we cannot forget about the whole Jewish factor here. And it's interesting that back in 1666, there was a man named Shabtai Tzvi who declared himself to be the Messiah. He was eventually put down, but a man named Jacob Frank picked up his mantle and made his way to Frankfurt, where he just happened to bump into Adam Weishaupt, who came up with the Illuminati. And guess what? He met Mr. Moneybanks himself, Lord Rothschild. So, these three then established what we understand to be the Illuminati system. It was the commingling of these three that created that. And of course, to people that are in the know, we know that it's not simply the Freemasons or something, but there's a whole other layer behind this, and that is the Jesuit order. The Jesuit order is behind this entire thing. So if we were to kind of pick one person or pick one office on a human level, it could in fact be the Black Pope, and not the guy that we actually see when they send the smoke out of that, when they're picking a pope, but the guy who is behind the scenes, the one who's in charge of the Jesuit order that we never get to meet. This could be a reference to him, or it could be a reference to the demon that is pulling the strings. And I would tend to think that it's probably the demon that's pulling the strings. Certainly there is an agent on the earth, but there's somebody, demonically speaking, who is actually behind the scenes and is doing these. Again, it fits with what we see in Zechariah, that there are these horsemen that are going out to and fro throughout the earth. We see that Satan was going to and fro throughout the earth. And of course, as we read the descriptions here, continuing on in Revelation chapter 6, we see that these are not humans. Certainly death is not a human, that has to be some kind of a demonic or angelic kind of power. And so I think that would make a lot more sense.
Well, I mean, for the other horses, we just said we don't know if it's supernatural to man. So either way, I think you're talking about going to and fro. It's interesting that in all the earth, that the center, the Council for Foreign Relations logo says everywhere, because they really are going all over the world doing their thing. and setting up central banking systems in every country that doesn't have a topple or to topple them, and then they go and set one up. And so I think if we view these as harbingers, in other words, things that have to go forward first for the of the New World Order, that will put everything. Christ finally does arrive, that there is a one world system, there is a one world banking, there's a one world. That, I mean, you make a very valid point with regard to the Black Pope, the Illuminati, the Vatican, and all of that. So, I think whoever this person is, I think we're both in agreement that this is stage one for laying the groundwork that will make everything that follows possible.
Yeah, I think that's really important to point that out. And I also want to point out that as these seals are open, when the seals are completely open, the whole thing is over, right? I mean, this seal, right? This scroll, when it is finally executed and it's realized, then God will be in complete control. And it's interesting that we've been having some different conversations on Facebook and such with different people, and I just want to let people know that this is all out of deep respect. We're brothers in Christ, and it's fun to sharpen our swords sometimes. And what I see, and I believe you're on the same page, Rob, is that when we talk about the ordering of the Book of Revelation, we're asking the question: is it laid out chronologically, or is it laid out thematically? And when we get to the end of this chapter, I think that's going to become very clear. At least in my mind, it becomes incredibly clear when you have all the tough guys of planet Earth saying it's over, we're dead, and you have the sky receding as a scroll, and you have all the mountains and islands moving out of their place. That's like a pretty big event, and unfortunately, I find many people tend to gloss right over that. But what I see is that the seals are a complete. That's the complete judgment system of God, and it encompasses everything. And it doesn't have to be just 7 years, like many people want. But I think if you start to cram all in 7 years, it just doesn't make any sense. There's not time for things to develop. We know that God can snap his fingers and things happen immediately, but that's not how it works for Satan. He has to get things set up. They have to be put into motion. And though Satan is very, very clever, and he really can do pretty impressive things, but it still takes planning. It takes time to execute these things. And even God himself doesn't usually, as far as we can tell, just make things happen and people have to bend over and do this different stuff. God is very patient, and he works with people, and he's got all the time in the world. So he's not in a big rush to get the children of Israel from Egypt to the Promised Land. He's like, fine, if you guys want to rebel against me and spend 40 years, no problem, right? We can do that. And so God takes his time. Satan has to take his time because he can't make things happen just by snapping his fingers. And I think what's so important to remember is that Satan has to deceive mankind. There is law and order in the universe. He just can't go breaking that anytime he wants to. I think what we underestimate Satan, and we think that he's breaking God's laws left and right. I don't think he is, frankly. I think he's getting us to break God's laws left and right. Yeah. And
he has to work within the legal system.
Exactly. Yeah, he really does. He has to work within. They have the law. I think we should do that sometimes, because it's very interesting. But I think we often come to top-down imposition upon our lives. When I think it's just the opposite. I think it's a bottom-up. In other words, it's like, this is how it is, right? I am an avid user of Microsoft Word, okay, and it comes with an instruction booklet. I mean, it's all digital, of course, but it does have a how-to instruction manual inside the program. And I can read that. I can read that, and I can become very good at it. I can become even better than I am. So it's you might say, well, this isn't fair. Why do they write it this way? Why do they say that I have to do it this way? Well, they're not telling you how to do it. They're just telling you how it is, right? When you can decide to forget that and not pay any attention to it if you want to, but it doesn't change the fact that that's how it is. Or maybe another example is the use of a microwave, right? I can put tin foil in my microwave if I want to. Nobody's going to stop me from doing that. I can hit the button and sparks will fly. But if I read the instruction booklet says, don't put that in there. And you may say, well, that's not fair. How dare them, take away my rights to do that? It's like, well, no, nobody's taking your rights away. This is an instruction booklet. It's telling you what's going to happen if you do that. And I think when we talk about the law, God is really telling mankind, look, do what you want, fine, but I'm just letting you know this is what's going to happen if you do that. Not because I'm sitting there with my clipboard and I can hardly wait to write down all the bad things you do, but there are consequences, just like jumping off a cliff. It's not like you're being punished as you fall and smash to the earth. It's like, well, that's just the consequence of breaking the law of gravity. And Satan understands that there is law. And so he cannot just go and break it. He can get us to break it, and then we jump to our death, as it were. But he has to be very careful, and so I think he's playing a very fine, a very dangerous game, but he's doing it pretty well. But he gets us to break the law, whereas he himself is, by and large, I would say, not breaking it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. We could do a whole show just on that. But yeah, it's one of the reasons why I think that the Illuminati puts everything out in plain sight.
Yes.
I used to always wonder, is it just an ego trip? Why do they in television shows and all over the place? And I believe that Amos 3 says, I'm not going to do anything except I reveal it first to the prophets. And I think, well, okay, if God himself is bound by a law that he created, that he's not going to say anything except first he reveals it, then the devil's bound by the same law. He does work within a legal system. He uses the law to his advantage. He knows what the law is, but just like it. Meanwhile, he's out there telling you on a regular basis, and this is one of the ways that he can say, look, I told him this is, was going to happen. Yep. I put it in the movies. I put it in the TV shows. I said in like 45 different TV shows and movies that 9/11 is going to happen. I use World Wrestling people to describe what's going to happen in detail, well in advance.
Yeah.
He's like, look, I put it all out. They just went ahead and did it.
It's kind of like when you get that really thick booklet from your credit card company saying we're going to raise your interest rate to 25%, and of course who's actually reading that thing? It's so thick, all that fine print. But it's been disclosed, right? You were told in advance, right? And that's what Satan's doing. He's like, look, or sometimes when you go to the beach, and then it says, this is actually a dangerous place, right? Or you go to some schools, at least in California, and they say, these premises are known to have caused cancer, and some people are like, well, what can you do, right? So yeah, Satan he's letting us know through the symbols that are out there in plain sight, but of course nobody can decode those for the most. But yeah, he has to work within that legal code. So yeah, just interesting thoughts. Again, I think the bottom line is we don't know absolutely who these people are on a white horse. But what the take that we have here, by and large, is that this doesn't have to fit with the lines of the 7-year period that people have popularly called the Great Tribulation. So, yeah. In fact, there's nothing that says it has to be that. It just doesn't say that at all.
Yeah, I'm going to put a graphic up on the screen here. This was and I'm still tweaking this. It's kind of a work in progress, but it's sort of a visual timeline. And when I was doing this, one of the arguments that comes up in the Facebook debates that I know that you've been in and I have as well on our pages, is somebody saying, well, there's a scroll being opened, so you know, if you imagine a scroll being sealed up with 7 seals, you can open up a little bit, you know, break the first seal, open up a little bit, break another seal, open up a little bit. By the time you get to like the 6th and 7th seal, the scroll's open. And at that point, John has a full picture. But like we've talked about in previous broadcasts, it's sort of like he's in that control room with all the TV monitors. Now he's got, okay, I'm going to look at this monitor and describe this. And then we got the, you know, the description of the trumpets. And then over here we got this, you know, there's the woes. And over here, the, you know, the bowls and whatnot. And so, I think there's validity to the idea of as the scroll's opening, more is being revealed. But by the time you get to the 6th and 7th seal, you know, it's all right there for John to see. And then he kind of goes back and describes each thing because he's in a non-linear environment, but he's writing in a linear format. So, you know,
I just wanted to point out in your graphic, you have, I'm going to put that up there so everyone can see while I'm talking, but in your graphic, I appreciate the scroll. If people see that on the left side, right in the middle, there's a scroll with 7 seals. You know, if it's like that, which it very well could be, and probably something similar to that, you can't open anything as you're breaking the seals, right?
Yeah, if it's like that, that's true.
You know, and even, I mean, let's take any kind of a scroll, right? If we have any kind of a scroll where you open it like this, right? If you got 7 seals on that thing, I mean, you can maybe open it just a little bit, right? You can see just a tiny bit of print, but you can't actually unroll that thing until, you know, it'd be the same with a notebook today, right? If you had 7 seals on your notebook, I mean, maybe you could kind of, you know, do a little dog ear kind of thing, but you can't really open the thing up until all the seals are broken. And you know, that's why I do believe that the scroll is the title deed to planet Earth, and essentially what Jesus is doing is he is now reclaiming his rightful property, and you know, he's kind of putting that eviction notice up on Satan's door, saying, "Look, you've been squatting in this house for 2,000 years. I had legal rights against you 2,000 years ago, but for my own reasons, I decided not to kick you out at that time because the time wasn't right, and I've let you be a squatter. But now I'm coming, and I'm basically putting, you know, 3 days or quit notice on your door, saying it's time to go." And as those seals are now being broken, he is reclaiming what is his. He is now going to execute his legal prerogative to planet Earth. So I think that's what's happening. And that by the time we get to the 7th seal, the whole thing is over. It's done. Jesus has come back. And that's why it's important to understand that the book of Revelation is not written, it's not written chronologically, but it's written in a thematic fashion, basically with different camera angles. And we see quite a bit of repeat throughout the book.
Yeah, my view of the scroll is very much like you see here. With the, you know, it's got 7 things you got to open to open the whole thing. The guy that was debating with us, or primarily with you, because I kind of backed out of it, was suggesting that the scroll has 1 seal, and you open it and unroll it, and then it gets stuck. And then you got to peel open another scroll to keep unrolling it. I mean, I've never seen a scroll that way. I suppose maybe they exist, but he seems to think that there are internal seals that as you're unrolling this thing, they have to get undone. I tend to think it's more like what's depicted here, which is exactly what you just described. But regardless, this is sort of the way I saw it as I started trying to visualize this, is you've got the 7 seals, however they're laid out on the scroll. And I really could see at least the first 5 happening in the birth pangs phase. And, you know, I've got the E.T. Great Deception going on here because I think that's certainly going to be a part of it. But then as you start getting into, you know, death and the 5th seal and 6th and 7th, you start seeing overlaps in description. And I know you've talked about this as well, that you listen to, or you look at the descriptions on some of the trumpets, and they're very similar to some of the things that are happening in the seals. And I actually questioned when I was putting the trumpets together. Like I said, I believe the 5th trumpet's in the mid-trib, right there in the middle, and that there are probably the kind kind of at the same time right in there. And but when I looked at the first trumpet, it talks about fiery blood and hail and all that, Revelation 8:1. And I looked at the description of the first trumpet, and it seems pretty close to the same description of what ends the Ezekiel 38 war. When you look at what happens at the end of that war, it's very similar to the description of the first trumpet. So I got to thinking, man, I wonder if that's what's going to happen, is that Ezekiel 38 war happens, and then, because it says it takes 7 years to clean up the mess. I thought, well, is that just a coincidence that it takes 7 years to clean up the mess, and we've got this 7-year tribulation period? I don't think that's a coincidence. So I got the first trumpet kind of going off at the beginning, the very beginning of the 7-year tribulation period, based on the description of the end of the Ezekiel 38 war.
Right. And while we're at it, I just want to show people what these seals look like. Here is an ancient scroll. You can see the scroll here. Can you see that, Rob?
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, look. You open one, you can't open this thing, right? You open number two, you can't open this. All that's happening is that with every one of these that's being opened, we're that much closer to the whole scroll actually now finally being opened, right? But you can't, until you've opened the seventh seal, you haven't opened anything, right?
Yeah.
Wow. you gotta crack this thing open, and you can't see that. Or even this one. Let's take this one. Supposing it was like this. Again, if you crack this one and then you crack that one, here's another shot, so people can see that, right?
Yeah.
You can't open this thing until they're all open, right? So I think that's what we've been missing, is that until you actually break every seal, you have not even opened the scroll itself.
Good point.
And I think that's something that we've really failed to understand. That the scroll is not opened until we've broken all 7 seals, and then once those are all broken, then that scroll can actually be opened. And and what we see in this book, we've talked about this before, but in the book of Revelation, we see many places where we've come up to the very, very end, and then we go back and we get another shot. That's why in Revelation 1:7, where it says, "Behold, he is coming with clouds, and every eye will see him, even they who pierced him." Look, that's the end. I mean, that's right. That's the second coming, right? So, we see the second coming throughout the book of Revelation, and that's why we can't say that it's written in a chronological fashion, as we're going to talk about in Revelation 6:14, when it says that the stars of heaven fell to the sky, the sky receded as fell to the earth. Excuse me. The sky receded as a scroll. Every mountain and island moves out of its place. Everyone goes and hides in the caves and says the great day of his wrath has come. I mean, that's the second coming. Then we get to Revelation chapter 11, and it says that this is it. It says this is it. This is the time when the kingdom of this world had become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ. I mean, my goodness. How do we get around this stuff without saying that this is not a chronological book, but it's a thematic book? Maybe that term thematic is throwing people off. It's kind of like if you write your biography, you don't have to write it, day 1, day 2, day 3. That gets kind of boring. But you group things according to different topics. And, it's still very literal. I think sometimes people say, well, if it's not chronological, then you're not taking it literally. No, I'm taking it very, very literally. All I'm suggesting is that because it is so literal, and we see things that are pretty much parallel, how do we account for those? And something that really has baffled me is when people get to Revelation 6:14, and they seem to think that every island and mountain moving out of its place is really not a big deal. I'm like,
right.
I kind of scratch my head. I'm like, that's a really big deal,
Yeah.
And I also want to point out that in Isaiah chapter 2, it says that the Lord alone will be exalted in that day, right? So we know from Revelation 13 that the Antichrist is going to be blaspheming against God and against those who are in heaven for 42 months, and that's in the second half of the 7-year period. He's gonna, he's gonna be Mr. Big Mouth, right? He's gonna be so arrogant and pompous, and he's gonna be saying all kinds of blasphemies for 42 months. So how can you possibly say that the Lord is being exalted, the Lord alone is exalted, when,
Right.
Mr. Big Mouth is down on planet Earth and he's waxing eloquently, right?
Yeah.
So the day of the Lord is the day that Jesus comes back. It's not the entire tribulation. It's not even the second half of the so-called tribulation. It's the day that Jesus comes back. And that's why when we get to Revelation 6:17, when it says the day of his wrath has come, that's because that's the day that Jesus comes back.
Yeah, I agree completely. I had written something on the 7-year a while ago. I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, and this is when I was beginning to realize it's not linear, and I had to throw away all my old charts because I was following the kind of the Hal Lindsey model, the Tim LaHaye model that most people are following, and had the nice neat order of the seals first, trumpets and bowls and all that. But as I was writing this and looking through it, I'm like, there are many examples of John's very nonlinear revelations throughout the text. For instance, we don't get very far into the story in a linear sense when all of a sudden we're told about events that will happen at the end of the story. In chapter 6, we are told about the first 6 seals being opened. After the 6th seal is opened, there is a great earthquake and all sorts of bad stuff happens. Chapter 6 thus ends with a question asking who will be able to survive. Then, as if to answer the question, we turn to chapter 7 and read about the 144,000 being sealed with the mark of God. And suddenly, John sees a great multitude of people clothed in white standing in front of the throne. This is where people say, this is the rapture, Revelation 7, right? But I'm like, well, and one of the elders answered, saying unto me, what are these which are arrayed in white robes, and whence came they? And I said unto him, Sir, thou knowest. And he said to me, these are they which came out of great tribulation. Most people look at the second half of the tribulation period as the great tribulation, and have washed the robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. There are 22 chapters in the book of Revelation that tell the story of the end of days. But at this point, the story was just beginning when all of a sudden John sees those who came out of the great tribulation. It's even written in the past tense. This is just one of many examples that seem to clearly illustrate that this is a very nonlinear book, and thus indicates that it should be understood as such. And that was, when I wrote that was just at the very beginning of me beginning to understand these things. Of course, in the last few years, as I've thrown out the old paradigm, it seems more clear than ever, especially since you and I started doing this show together, Revelation, that it's definitely not written in a linear format. And I love that are sealed up that way. I think that's a great visual and helps us to understand the book's not even really opened until they crack all those seals, and then John gets the big picture, and he's like, okay, time to start explaining stuff. Okay, let me look at this monitor. Okay, yeah, now let me look at this monitor. Very well illustrates what's going on here.
Yeah, when I was writing my book, The Millennium Chronicles, and I wanted to put everything together based on Scripture, I had to come to that same realization. I'm like, oh my goodness, this book is not chronological. I had always taken it as a chronological book, but it's not. And when you take a good hard look at it, and I know lots of people have spent a lot of time looking at the book, but we all come to it with our own own colored glasses, and sometimes we have to take those glasses off and say, could it be this other way? And that's what I had to do. I wasn't very happy about it because I had time invested in the other model, but again, we're on a quest for truth, right? We're on a quest for reality, and that's what I came back to. I'm like, I just want to know what reality is. I'm not here to defend a particular position. I'm not here to defend my previous writings or somebody else's previous writings. I'm here to know what is real. That's what matters to me, because we can sit here and say, oh no, this particular position is the only way to go, and we've believed this since 500 years ago. It's like, what does it matter? What is really going to transpire? That is what we're after. And so I think we'll just continue on that quest. And gee, Ralph, we're out of time. Can you believe it? It's hard to believe, but
wow, are we?
Yeah, we this time is just flown by. But
We got through a whole 2 verses.
I know. It's almost like a record for us. But we will pick this up. We'll pick this up in episode 22. So we hope everyone comes back. Keep checking out the show. We're excited to be back doing this. So we do plan on getting through the book of Revelation someday, before the Lord comes back. So we're excited about that. So everyone, just keep studying, keep reading the Word. God has great things in store for us. Until next time, God bless.